Right, thank you very much, Edwin. Thank you for inviting me as well. And thank you for all you good people for turning up. Hope you don't regret it. Right, as it says on the flyer, I'm a novice author really. I've written 2 books and had them both published. Whether this is the pinnacle of my career or the end of my career or perhaps somewhere in the middle, I have absolutely no idea where we shall go. I'm just going to talk about what I've actually done. The first book, which I anticipate a great big groan, appears to be about football. Okay? It's called Attached to Coventry City. I'm a Coventry City fan, which you'll probably gather. And this was the book, of the 2 books, this was the one that I felt dropped into my lap. It was the easy one. The Passionate book over there, that was the one that took over 30 years to write. So, the easy one, the Coventry City one, the idea, I got it in about April 2020. I wrote the book in about 6 months that year. It was the pandemic year, of course. And it was published by a fairly well-known sports publisher and delivered to me a year later, and took about 18 months from beginning to end. And I thought, this authorship business, it's a doll, isn't it? So this is where it started. This was a party. I'm just going to move this table a bit out of my way. It was a party for me, one of those parties that ends in a naught. So you'll be pleased to know that I've managed to get to 110, and I'm still here. This is family and friends, dance friends. This is a table of mainly dance friends. That's a friend of mine who I've known for 65 years. 1 or 2 ex-wives dotted about the place. This guy here, I'll be speaking to you about him very shortly. He was my headmaster at my school where I was 27 years. He was headmaster from 1988 to 2004. He taught RE, and I was the head of RE. He supports Newcastle United. So we talk about football, we have similar political and other views, and although we had a 10-year gap when he left, we sort of text each other like all the time now. So I decided, as he was a very confident speaker, he's a Methodist lay reader, I asked him if he would do a talk at my party, and he happily agreed. And his name is, I've forgotten his name. I've made his name up. Kevin Milburn, that's his name. Good Newcastle name. Kevin Milburn. It's not his real name, but he's Kevin Milburn in the books. And he came to do a talk. And he decided to give a school report on me, seeing that he'd known me for quite a long time, and I'd had to tell him off once or twice as well, which I think he realised I was doing my job. But at any rate, in his school report he said, what I can talk about sport, politics, educational, transaction analysis. And then right at the end he said, what I like to talk about most is attachment theory, attachment theory, attachment theory. Coventry City, Coventry City, Coventry City. And everybody laughed, because presumably I talked to all of them about these things for a long, long time. And I thought, that's cute. I mean, I make a lot of lists about all sorts of things, but I've never put those 2 ideas together. One's a psychological theory, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, and the other is a football club that nobody's ever heard of really, not this part of the world anyway. So I thought it was interesting, but I let it go, didn't think anything more about it. But that afternoon, as he was talking, Coventry were actually losing away to Shrewsbury. It was their 3rd defeat of the season, which after about 25 matches is not bad. Actually, it was their last defeat of the season as well. The season ended in March because of the pandemic, and Coventry City were top of the league by quite some way. They were champions of Division 1. Now, if you look at this, what's interesting on this picture is the last time we had been champions of anything was in 1967. 53 years, and I was at the match in 1967. And between Coventry City being champions twice, I've got 2 degrees, had 2 marriages, 2 different jobs, 3 different schools. My whole life had been lived. And I think it's probably about the worst record in football is for a team to go so long without winning anything in league terms anyway. And there is the manager, current manager, then manager, very good manager. You can see the pandemic gloves he's wearing at the time, not wearing a mask, but there he's lifting the Division 1 trophy. And I thought, what can I do to celebrate? I wasn't living in Coventry, I haven't lived in Coventry since 1970s. And I thought, I'll go down to Coventry and celebrate with all the people in the city centre. And there were people in the city centre breaking all the pandemic rules, having a jolly good time. And I thought, I don't really want to get fined or die as a result of going to these festivities. So I forgot that idea. I thought I could put some stuff in my Coventry City scrapbook. I could buy the team shirt for that season. I did all that. I then put the shirt and a poster in my front window. Still didn't really seem very good. I even put a poster for Leeds because they got promoted that year as well. But I wanted to do something else. And I thought, I'll write a book. I've got quite a lot of backlog of Coventry City stuff. I'll write a book. And I thought, what can I call a book? I thought, aha, attached to Coventry City. What a title. And I knew that I could do something on that book. And so I got the idea, I organised the story in the chapters. I had quite a lot of photographs, a lot of which I've taken myself, but other photographs through the years. Started writing 5 to 6 months, sent it off to several sports publishers, got the usual rejection slip, thank you very much, but we're not doing this sort of thing now. Good luck for the future. But then one came back and said, right, when would you like to start? I said, are you offering me a contract? I said, oh yeah, quite like it. So they got on and published it. They asked for some organisational changes, which was fine. I put it in very, very small little bites. And they thought, no, put them together, make a proper chapter of it, which is quite happy with. And I then was able to gain the support of Coventry City Football Club, and the manager, the guy who just saw holding the cup, he was willing to write me the foreword for the book, which was very pleasing. And there he is, there's the book. When I saw the front cover, I went, wow, wow. 3 times I went, wow, because I think it's a very impressive front cover. I'd sent off some ideas, just pictures of players or whatever, and when I saw that, I sort of couldn't believe how good it was. It was actually designed by a Coventry City supporter who happened to work for that publisher. So I was amazingly pleased. And over here it gives you a little introduction. Why would a normal teenager throw his heart and soul into an average 3rd Division football club for almost a decade, only to walk away from them at the height of their success? Which is what I did. I walked away from them when they were just got promoted to the 1st Division. I walked away for 20 years, didn't come back till 1987. That book explains why. Here's my celebrating my first success, my first 5 free books coming in. And here's the guy that helped me quite a bit. The guy with the waistcoat is called Mark Hornby. He's the head of media at Coventry City, and he'd put a few things in the magazine, Matchday magazine, for me already, so we sort of knew each other. He's very good at replying. So I met him, and he said, yep, we'll get your book in the Matchday magazine. It's going to be up on the main scoreboard this afternoon, and it's in the club shop. So it sold pretty well. I don't know how very well it is, but I keep getting a little check for some royalties. So he helped me a great deal. He got Mark Robbins, the manager, to write a foreword for me. He said, here's a catalogue of photographs, take what you want. So the book's packed full of photographs as well. All too easy, this authorship lark, isn't it? And another high point, that's Waterstones. I didn't put it there. My other book I've had to put in places. So if you see Passionate in Waterstones, probably know that I've been there and ordered it and forgot to collect it. But that one was genuinely there. Nuneaton, of course, near Coventry. So they had it as a local book. And yeah, that was pretty pleasing. And here is what Mark Robbins wrote in the foreword. He actually wrote about 3 pages. It wasn't just a paragraph. This is what the manager wrote. What makes this book different from others on football is that it also looks at attachment theory and the feelings and bond that fans develop for their club, with it being akin to a religion for many supporters. Which is interesting because my 20 years away, I had been into religion. So he touched a nerve there. I write about that in the book. Looking at this theory and directly linking it to something we're all passionate about, football and Coventry City, is a new perspective, and it makes for a very interesting and unique read. Now, before they did the dust cover, the publishers asked me, can you give us a list of what you think are the 8 best features of your book? And we'll put them on the inside flap. And there they are on the inside flap. And I put the first one, I thought the best, a foreword written by the manager. He was and still is a very successful manager. Thought that's the best thing. And at the bottom, I thought, oh, there's a bit about psychology. They wrote back and they said, we disagree with you. We think the psychology is the bit that will interest people the most. And so on the front cover here, an exploration of the crucial but often overlooked psychology behind football fandom. Right at the bottom, oh, there's a foreword by the manager, Mark Robbins. So I was quite pleased with that. I wasn't expecting it, but I was quite pleased that that's how they'd decided to do it. And now, what I didn't tell you at the beginning is that I would have a break here in case any of you have got any questions you want to ask about that first book, because we're pleased to know we're moving on away from football. Yes?
What is attachment theory?
Ah, we're going to come to that.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes.
I've got another slide, which is, this is attachment theory. Anybody else? Yes?
Do you know how many books you've sold of the Coventry City?
I would say it's probably only around about the 500 mark, I would think.
Right.
Yeah. I think, when they play in top matches, like they will be doing in a fortnight, as I'm sure you all know, semi-final of the FA Cup at Wembley, Coventry City against Manchester United.
Really?
Yeah, really. And I think they all should buy a copy, but they haven't. Yeah.
Can I ask you, do you suggest that somebody can change their attachment from one club to another? Or is it always
That is a very interesting question. Very interesting question. I went to a funeral once, and there was a lad, one of the relatives to the deceased. This is the only thing I remember at the funeral. He stood up and spoke quite passionately, because I think his dad was a Bradford supporter. And I think Bradford were a bit in the doldrums. And so he became a Leeds supporter. And then he said, but a few years down the line, I regretted it. I realised Mum said, he's almost in tears. So I went back to Bradford. I think it's very difficult. I think, and it's like the attachment theory itself. Whatever grabs you when you're young, your first impressions. I mean, why do people support all sorts of useless teams if it's not for their first introduction?
First love.
Sorry?
It's the first love.
It's a first love, yeah. And in my case, it was a sort of a substitute for what I felt was missing from my parents. Not that I knew anything about attachment at that point, but it gave me something at the age of 9 that I'd never experienced before. And I guess that is true with not just football, with lots of other things where perhaps things are not brilliant at home, and people find something else and they think this is brilliant. And that's what I thought about Coventry City, until I realised that it wasn't quite brilliant enough. And then I went into the church. And I eventually discovered that that wasn't brilliant enough either. But more on that later. Okay, anybody else? Any thoughts? Okay, we're going to have a look at book 2. A very, very different kettle of fish, but the same themes, which you've probably already guessed. It was about 1989 when it started, but it feels a little bit like when you're looking for the source of a river. Oh, there's a little bubble there, there's a little stream there, there's a wet land there. And you could identify lots of different sources. And then some official will say, oh, that's it. It's very difficult to put a finger on when this book started, but I'm going to point to one in a second. And then I tried to write it. I had a sort of title. I knew that I wanted it to be an autobiography of my own chaotic life, because my life had been pretty chaotic. And I guess I wanted to get it out of my system. But all the versions I tried, none of them satisfied me. Final version, I thought, yeah, this one should go. Now I started writing it 18 months before the Coventry book, but it didn't get published till several years after. I went with what would now be called a celebrity version or a charity version. Publishers that weren't mainstream publishers, but getting hold of a mainstream publisher is a big job. And total length of time from first idea to the book being published was about 32 years. Right, now this is, you might think, a very weird slide. Round about 1989, in fact exactly 1989, something happened that got me thinking in a particular way, and I decided I want to put this in a chart. This is the very first chart I made, and I've probably made several hundred of them since. Basically self-analysis, what's going on in my life and in the world. This is my very first rather crude attempt. I called it 40 years, the ups and downs. Here's the ups, this is the plus, good things that happened. Here's the bad things that happened. Going through from 1950 right through up to when I did it, 1989, 1990. Now, you might say, well, this period was pretty bad and that period was pretty good. But what interests me now is this period, not the picture, this period here. It's the 50s. When I was thinking about all the good and bad things in my life, I didn't have any memory of the 50s. The 50s was a fog. And if any of you are as old as me, you might remember smogs and fogs in the 50s. Everything was grey, nothing was in colour, television included. And this sort of rankled with me a bit. I didn't feel I could know myself unless I knew what went on in my first 9 years of life. And for a few years I had other things on the go to think about, relationships and so forth. But it still was an underlying theme, like what happened to me in those years. I did have one memory though, that I could actually think, yeah, I remember that. Now obviously you can start to see a link between the two books. That's Highfield Road. It's on the cover of my other book at the bottom. There. And when I first went to Highfield Road, which was the ground of Coventry City at the age of 9, I absolutely loved it. I think it was a 0-0 draw against Millwall Reserves, so I mean, hardly a promising match to start with. But it didn't matter. I was on my own and I could do, say and think what I liked, where my parents wouldn't tell me off for this or calm down for that. So I ran around all the pitch and back probably about twice, went up to the Spine Cop, which was behind me, got down right close to the pitch. It was great. And after then, I had a season ticket till 1967 when I walked away. So I had that one memory. But I thought, well, what happened? Something must have happened between the age of 0 and the age of 9. And then 1993, I saw a film on Channel 4. Some of you may have heard it. I'm sure some of you will know the song, Lipstick on Your Collar. And I watched it with a mate of mine. And there's quite a bit of politics in. It was about the Suez crisis in the 50s. And there's quite a bit of music in. Bill Haley, Elvis Presley, rock and roll, which I actually do remember. So I worked out, well, I must have remembered some music from the 50s, if nothing else. But as it went on for about 4 weeks, in fact it might even be 6 weeks, it was quite long. And we found it, both of us found it very interesting. Me for other reasons. Because it took me back to the 50s. Here's one of the key characters, a tart with a heart, as some of the reviews called her. And I thought, oh, she's beautiful. And it reminded me that I'd had a childminder who was slim and young and beautiful and blonde and wore a polka dot skirt. And I absolutely loved her to bits. She was funny, she was fun, she would ask me about myself. We could, I wouldn't say we could do what we liked, but there wasn't a lot of restrictions and so forth. It was great, I loved her. And probably told my parents that as well. So she only lasted about a few months. And then we got somebody much more strict, like my parents. But I thought, yeah, I call her now Auntie Caroline. I can't actually remember what her name was, but I do remember enjoying her coming over. And she was slightly cheeky, slightly naughty, I won't tell you how, but she was. And I learned a bit at the age of 5 that I didn't know before. But yeah, she was great. And she also, in the film, Lipstick on Your Collar, this lady went to the Hammersmith Palais to dance, Friday, Saturday evenings. And it recalled an experience I had when I was probably about 7 or 8, when I went on holiday to a social do, and I was expected to go along to this social. I wasn't very sociable, neither my brother wasn't either. And I went, and I was going to hate it, until towards the end, when there was some dancing, some girls who I like the look of during the week, they got me up to dance. And I thought, well, that's a bit scary. Had they always been to, obviously I've always been to boys' schools, but it was a bit scary. But by the time I got into it, I absolutely loved dancing with them. So it reminded me of that memory as well. And then, school photograph. Here am I. And there's the lad I've been friends with for 65 years. But there are some other stories there that I remembered. Glenda, she was my girlfriend for about 3 or 4 months. We used to walk around the school fields, away from everybody else, arm in arm. That was so nice. A little bit of affection, even at the age of 7, because I left. I was sent to a boys' grammar school at the age of 7. So that's a story I remembered. And then this little guy here, called him Curly in the book, it's not his real name. He was a little imp, but it wasn't his impishness that impressed me. It was his parents that impressed me. We went back to his house. His parents owned a sweet shop, and we were playing. His mum was there, and his dad came in. And when his dad came in, him and his wife had a long embrace and a kiss. I thought, that's odd, that's not normal. And then Curly himself jumped up into his dad's arms. I thought, that's definitely not normal. And that sort of, shocked me. I thought, what's going on here? This is not a world I know or familiar with, though it is rather nice. So that's another memory. So I got together about half a dozen very clear memories from the 50s as a result of seeing the film Lipstick on Your Collar. And eventually, these memories I put into stories. That year, 1993, big year. And these stories, they were rough, they were raw. I just got out the emotions and the facts as I remembered them. And I actually wrote these stories about 60 in a month or two. I actually woke myself up at 2 o'clock in the morning every day to write another story. And then one when I came back from school. So I had these stories. There were some I couldn't write because they were too powerful. Didn't think I had the words to write these stories. I did eventually write about them. But at the time I couldn't, because I just thought, well, these are too powerful. I don't think I've got the language for them. That obviously represents the religious phase of my life. This represents a later football phase, ladies I had relationships with, and so forth. And so I started to do some writing. And then later that year, 1993, I came across this book. Here it is. This is the actual book I bought. Because in these relationships that I'd had prior to the film, we talked about, and the lady had had issues with her children or with her sister, various things. And I'd also read the book about Diana, that some of you may remember, came out about that time, and her problems, that all this pointed back to childhood, which I had earlier rejected. I had been in therapy for probably about 8 years. And how are we doing for time? I've been in therapy for about 8 years, and when the therapist first suggested that it might have something to do with my mother, I said, oh, rubbish, 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 rubbish. My mother doesn't know anything about me, so don't talk about my mother, please. So I dismissed the idea. But by the time I got a few years later, I was starting to think, well, perhaps there is something in it. And I read this book by Jeremy Holmes, who I'll refer to later. And as I read it, like I underlined almost every other line, so much, it all made perfect sense to me. And I think somebody asked about attachment earlier, and so John Bowlby, by the way, is the founder of attachment theory, along with a lady called Mary Ainsworth. And he was popular, then he became less popular because it was thought that he was a bit anti-feminist. It's based on tons of research, humongous amounts of research. I've got a whole shelf about attachment theory, shelf of books at home about it, and I then went on to teach it at A-level. And here are the basics of attachment theory. That all humans, and obviously many animals as well, form some sort of emotional attachment with their caregivers in their first few years of life. The type of attachment they form depends on the quality of care they receive. There are 4 main types of attachment: secure, insecure, which has other names for it, avoidant attachment, disorganised attachment. A warm, affectionate, interactive and stimulating relationship with carers is most likely to lead to a secure attachment. Secure is best, basically. It doesn't solve all your problems, but it helps you not to have so many problems in the first place. And your childhood attachment is very likely to affect and influence your life and relationships as an adult. If you want to look this up, you can find on the internet something called the Love Quiz. And in fact, which may surprise you, to the back of my Coventry City book, I put the Love Quiz, because that helps to explain certain things about adult attachment. So the sort of relationships you make as a child is likely. It's not automatic, it depends on various circumstances, but the research suggests that there's a 70% chance that if you're born into a chaotic family, you may well find yourself with chaotic later relationships. Do any of you watch Doc Martin?
Yes.
Yeah? Well, he's a classic avoidant. He doesn't like people. He likes bodies because he can do his business on bodies. And his partner, is always trying to get him to like people. He doesn't really like people. He's clearly an example of an avoidant attachment. I identify with the anxious or ambivalent attachment. However, does that partly answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I mean there's a lot more I could say because as I said I taught it for 15 years at A level, but those are the very basics. And yeah, I mean I did all sorts of other things with these stories. One friend I showed the stories to, she said, "That's a good bit. That's a good bit. Don't think much of that. That's a good bit. Why don't you put all the good bits together and make a page of it?" I thought, okay. So 30 years on, I've now got 3 volumes, which I call Reflections of a Passionate Life. So there's writing about my life, and there's pictures as well, which I use to help write Passionate, of course. This is one of the versions of the book that didn't get going. Nice cover, different pseudonym at the bottom, and it's called The Search for Secure Attachment. I didn't really know where I was going with it, but the big problem I found with this version, I wrote out all the stories and that was fine. And I think, right, where do I get the psychology in? So I thought, I'll put it in some appendices. So I started writing out the appendices. And after doing about 3, I thought, this is so boring. I don't really want to write anymore. Certainly if I don't want to write it, no one's going to want to read it. So that one went out the window. And the idea went on the back burner for quite a few years until I went to Florence. I went with another lady friend, and we had a bit of a tiff when we got to Florence about the hotel. It wasn't quite as we expected it to be. And I went off in a huff, and it was rush hour, dark, drizzly, rainy in Florence, this city I'd never been to before. So I walked through the streets and I saw a bookshop. And I thought, well, it wasn't quite closing time, let's just have a little browse. So I had a little browse in this bookshop, and this is what I came up with. Now, it's a happiness book. There are loads of happiness books, probably the most written about subject, non-fiction subject. And I thought, oh, I should go into the happiness book. And I read it. I thought, this is good. This is different. What was different about it? 2 things. First thing, it was written in the first person present. All my writing had been in the past, because it was about the past. But this writing was in the first person present. And I thought, this is interesting. Writing in the present makes it much more interesting. It makes it alive. So I thought, I'll put all of my stuff in the present. And also, she wrote it as a memoir. She went to California deliberately to find about happiness, because people are meant to be happy in California when there's not an earthquake or whatever, fires or whatever. But there's a big happiness industry in California. So she told us all the groups that she went to that were meant to make her happy. And when she described her experiences, then she devoted a page or 2 to her reflections about happiness, what it had taught her, what she thought about it. I thought I could do that with my book. I could write my stories, and then at the end of each chapter, I could do a little section on the psychology from what's gone before. And that's what happened. I got started writing, and in the book here, there's 3 going for £10 each, by the way, which is cheaper than you'll get them most of the places. And there's some CDs. I've done a soundtrack to go with it. But here I ended up with 8 chapters. Each chapter has 10 sections. They're all small sections. They're all sort of bite-sized. And the 10th section is simply called a review. So the 10th section, I reflect on the psychology. Most of it's attachment, but there are other psychologies there as well. I reflect on the stories that have gone before. So it means that you can actually read it without reading psychology. You can just read it as a story. If you want to stop, read some of my thoughts about it, you can do that. You've got a choice. And then Jeremy Holmes, the guy who had written this book, I sent him off my version once I'd done it in this new way that I was reasonably pleased with. And he wrote me a long endorsement, much longer than this. I just picked out a bit. And he wrote, James Adams' touching, well-written, accessible book with its overarching but non-dogmatic framework, attachment theory, sets it head and shoulders above similar accounts of psychological and spiritual trauma. Strongly recommended to readers interested in religion, sex, marriage, divorce, football and the arts, i.e. almost everyone. And I said, thank you very much. And I thought the books would fly off the shelves with that endorsement. The problem is, I couldn't get them to fly on the shelves in the first place. That's a problem that has remained with me. But anyway, it's still very nice to have that sort of endorsement. And here's the front cover, which you can see. It's nothing like as good as the Coventry City front cover. And that's possibly because I sent to them a cover something like that. And I was hoping they would do something fantastic with it. But they just did a slightly improved version of what I've got. It's okay. It's got my football, childhood, religion, relationships, mental health issues, crises. It's got the main features there, but yeah, it could have been better. Having said that, the book they produced, overall, I'm pretty pleased with. I think it's well produced, well written because I wrote it with Kathy's great help here, and it's got pictures in as well, which scattered about. So I'm really quite pleased with the book. It's the marketing that leaves a lot to be desired. And here we are again, celebrating my second book with a customary glass of bubbly. Oh, we're going to go back one. And then I had to think, how am I going to get this marketed? And I think I probably took a wrong turning. I knew a lady who had written a book with the same publisher, and she said they're useless, the marketing. And she went round West Yorkshire and beyond to meetings just like this. And I thought, well, that seems like hard work. But I think in retrospect, I think she probably did a lot better than I have to. I thought, no, we want to get it into magazines, into newspapers. And, my local East Leeds magazine, I think they have 16,000 readers. They put an article in, so forth. I thought, well, I'm bound to get some from that. I don't know if I got any, I don't know. But my efforts at marketing, because the publishers haven't really done any, haven't really brought. I probably should have spent my time coming to groups like this, rather than leaving it till too late. So that's an issue with the Passionate book, is the marketing. I'm now going to, I think we're okay for time, I'm now going to finish with the opening story of Passionate. It's called Desolation Row. Yeah, Desolation Row. It comes before the first chapter starts. It's like an introduction to the book. After I'd left religion, which was extremely traumatic, I left Coventry City quite easily because I had a religious conversion experience. Leaving religion, I've been an Anglican minister for 10 years. Leaving religion was extremely traumatic, long drawn out, painful. It ended when I fell in love with a lady in the book called Francesca, who was a mental health nurse, and she just therapized me. She listened to all my problems. She was the only person I could talk to, and obviously I felt head over heels in love with her, and for a time, her with me. And then she left. Her husband wanted to get back together. He'd been away. And she felt she owed him that. And for the previous 6 months, my whole emotional and mental world had been with Francesca. I had become overwhelmingly attached to her, as I had been to Coventry City and to Christianity, and now Francesca. And this is the road where she walked away. And this photograph was taken outside my front gate. My front gate's just about here. And strange as it may seem, I can't really believe myself, I'm sure that I stood at that front gate, looking at, she actually went off in a car, looking at where a car went. Staring down that street, I think I stood there without moving for 4 hours. I was struggling to comprehend what had happened and how I could possibly live my life without this wonderful lady. And that's why I call it Desolation Row. In 1990 it actually blew up, which might be just as well. That's not in the book. But if I may, I'll just read you a short section from Desolation Row, just to give you a flavour. I actually need to use this version. Here we go. Okay, it's a dead-end street where I live. This is talking about that road. It's a dead-end street where I live, and I live at the dead end. Not a suburban cul-de-sac, just a 10-foot wall of old red bricks and breeze blocks, topped off with shards of broken glass in concrete and rusting barbed wire. This is where my street ends. It's my very own Berlin Wall, except there's no Checkpoint Charlie here, just a dim and dingy Crown pub at the corner, with its weak Christmas lights and bleak faded posters. Either side of the street are 2 rows of back-to-backs, standing tall and creating dark shadows in the bright morning sun. 2 large stray dogs scavenge the open bins and chase each other round, and I call some lines of T.S. Eliot from a happier teenage world long since left behind. Here's the quote from Eliot. "Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels." To other residents, of course, all this may be home, and I do have a house at the dead end, but I'm in shock and scarcely able to move from my own front gate. In any case, what possible reason do I have for moving? Where can I possibly go when both body and soul are stuck at the dead end of Desolation Row? Can you cope with another 5 lines? Yeah. My desolation has been very traumatic and is now complete. Within the past year, I've lost my religious faith and identity, a good career, a long-term relationship, and virtually all of my friends. Only one remained true, because they were all Christian friends, and they didn't want to know me anymore. I've now lost Francesca, the most caring and lovely lady who knew me through and through. But most of all, I've lost any sense of who I am, whereas once I thought I knew. We'll leave it there. Thank you. So, have you got any questions? Yes?
Yes, I'd like to know, how do you feel it benefited you to write your memoirs?
Yeah, I mean, enormously. I mean, I've been doing it for sort of 3 decades, really. It gives what Professor Holmes, it gives a sense of what he calls autobiographical competence. In other words, you feel secure and happy, not happy, jolly happy, but content, self-understanding about your own life, who you are and where you are in the world. He calls it autobiographical competence. And basically, people who gain that or who have that are likely to become, if they're not already, securely attached. So I now feel that where I was very anxiously attached before, I feel that I've what he calls earned attachment. Through doing a lot of work on yourself, you can come to feel more secure. So I would say that's the result of all my memoir work, is I feel very much attached in myself and not needing necessarily other external attachments, which of course can let you down. Yes?
What made you leave religion?
What made you leave religion? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. The first serious problem, I think, was the amount of evil in the world, suffering. I couldn't reconcile that with the God of love at all, let alone threats of hell and goodness knows what else. And then while I was in the church, I held a belief, which I now view as not very sensible, of the infallibility of the Bible. Like everything in the Bible is true. But when I tested this against various criteria, and I mean, I did theology. I studied theology for 5 years, so, and I kept on reading. The more I read, somebody raised a question about this. I thought, all right, I better read more to sort this one out. And as I read more, I found another problem, and it's sort of the problem seemed to snowball. At the same time, I realised my mental health wasn't great. I couldn't cope with certain frustrations, certain situations, and I did have a big meltdown on the holiday before I met Francesca. I had a huge meltdown, and I thought, this is not right. And I decided then to give up the church. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Is it still the case?
Sorry?
You don't go to church at all? Or?
Strangely enough, I like going in churches,
Right.
but my actual preference is for modern churches.
Yeah.
I like light modern churches. I don't like old churches with rood screens and all sorts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, when I go on holiday, we'll always look out for a cathedral or a church or something. Anything vaguely evangelical, however, any praise the Lords or hallelujahs, I'll run a mile. So it strikes me in different ways. Yes?
Did you ever want to go back and talk with your mother about why she had been a secure person in your life?
Well, that's very, very interesting. I missed an opportunity there.
Because you're not talking about your father.
My father was an avoidant.
Okay.
Okay, he didn't get involved in anything and he didn't say anything. I never had a single conversation with my father that I remember, but he was generally supportive when my mother got on to me. As for my mother, your initial question is very interesting. And I sort of missed an opportunity, I think, because for the last few years, probably for the last 10 years, she used to tell me the same story over and over again. And it appears in it's the first story, after Desolation Row, it's the first story that appears in the book. I'm just going to move, to answer your question, I'm just going to move on to that picture. It's a very, very sad picture, that. There's my grandfather without his wife. All pictures before that, his wife was with her. That's my mother, and that's me. And you can see from my father's face, he's bereft. But my mother, I think, was even more bereft. She was knocked up in a cold January night by the police to say that her mother had just died. Her mother had died. My mother didn't know she'd even been ill. But she got pneumonia and she passed away very quickly. My dad hadn't bothered to make a file while she was at the hospital identifying the body. And I think my mother then spent the next 2 years in bed with what today we would call clinical depression. And she told me this story again and again and again. Even while I knew attachment theory, I didn't pick up on it. I think our relationship was so difficult, it would have been difficult to dig any deeper. But that's the reason, or part of the reason, or perhaps the main part of the reason, why I ended up as an anxious child, longing to go and support Coventry City. Yeah, so she did talk to me about it. Yeah, and I wish I'd sort of, in a sense, made more of it.
So how old were you when your mum died?
When
your grandma died?
I was 1,
Right.
and that is the age when attachment takes over. It is about the worst age, and there are lots of studies on mothers who have clinical depression, and lots of studies on their children if they're born, or lots of mothers get clinical depression at the time of birth or thereafter. And it's not a good combination for the child if the mother has clinical depression. Yes.
Can I just take you back to your publishing story? You said that you didn't think their marketing was very good. Have they promised that their marketing would be?
Well, you can promise all sorts of things with nice words, but
And what were your expectations?
I suppose because I spoke to this lady who had the same publisher, I suppose they weren't great. So I thought they would do more. You know, we all see in papers and magazines all these great book reviews and stuff. Why is my book there? Why isn't my book there? I eventually got Yorkshire Post to write an article about my book, but that was all. I didn't see any reviews. They say, oh, it's online. Well, I do go online, but not to that extent. So I didn't have great expectations. But the problem is, because I'm a novice author, I didn't know how to break in. The publishing world seems to me a very, very closed shop. And any author, if you look at a book, I'm a new author, then look at the small print. Oh, I've written articles for the Times Literary Supplement and for this magazine and that magazine. In other words, they'd done a lot of work and got their name noticed. And then when they came to write a book, oh, here's a new author. I hadn't got anything of that background, that writing background, at all. And to try to get a decent publisher was extremely hard work.
Did you have an agent?
No. Getting an agent is extremely hard work.
Did you pay for your own publishing?
Yes.
Oh, big mistake.
Yeah.
Not for the Coventry City one.
Not for the Coventry one,
With the other one.
but for the Passionate
And
one.
how many copies have you got under the bed?
Well, I've got 3 at the moment. I won't have any by the end of the day.
You should never pay for your own publishing, I was told years and years ago.
No, I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
But when you've written to 20 publishers and they all say they're not interested,
Well, you should listen to them.
and then when you get one who wrote glowingly about it, and I have that endorsement from Jeremy Holmes, you think, well, I better take the opportunity while it's on offer and see what happens. But there we go, live and learn.
But who do you think your audience is?
Sorry?
Who's your audience?
That's a good question as well. You see, the Coventry City book has got an obvious
Yes.
market.
Yeah.
My Passionate book hasn't. So the general public, people who are interested in psychology.
Is the Passionate book on Kindle?
Sorry?
Is it an
It is on Kindle, yes. It is on Kindle. Yeah, and these publishers, they have put it on all the websites. It's on Waterstones, it's on Amazon, it's on W.H. Smith's, and you can get Kindle versions of it. It's there, and you can look it up. In fact, if you look on the QR code, the cards I left you, look on that QR code, it'll bring up all the details about it. Yeah, so they've done the basics. But you need a bit more basics to sell books. But I sort of don't mind that much, I'm pleased that the book is there. And it's important to me. I'm not interested in money in the slightest. So even though I get the odd few £100 from the Coventry City publishers, I think, oh, that's okay. I'm not money motivated from that point of view. But anyway, yeah, it's 3 books, £10 each if any of you are interested, and you can have a CD soundtrack to go with it. Because in the book, both books in fact, I've only got the soundtrack for this. I refer to music quite a lot, and so I thought it'd be quite fun to put it on a soundtrack. So you've got Neil Sedaka, Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Roy Orbison, the Beach Boys, Connie Francis, ABBA, the Mavericks, Britney Spears, Rumours of Fleetwood Mac. So 20 songs, they're free. Books at £10 each. Okay.
Thank you very much.